Find tools and resources at aarp.org/possibilities.
Welcome back to Morning Joe. You see the sun coming up at 6:46 in the morning over the United States Capitol in Washington. Joining us now here in New York, Democratic Governor of the great state of Delaware, Governor Jack Markell. Governor, good to see you.
Good to see you.
You've pointed out a glaring omission in our sports report.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And you're correct, because one of the great, perhaps the second best women's college basketball player in the country.
Some of us think maybe the best.
Really? Okay. All right. You have to say that. I understand.
Some of us believe it.
But a big win for Delaware in the NCAA tournament yesterday.
It was amazing. It was just, I was there last night. The vice president was there. They were down, Blue Hens were down by about 8 at halftime. Came back and beat North Carolina, who is seeded 3rd, Blue Hens seeded 6th. On to Bridgeport, Connecticut against Kentucky. Elena Del Don, 33 points, became the 9th player in history to score 3,000 points.
This is a man who knows his Blue Hens hoops. Yes.
Okay,
we stand corrected. Yes, she's a great player and a great team.
And this is for you.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Is that going to fit Barnacle? It'll look good on the Y League for you, buddy.
Yeah.
Take that.
That's mine.
Let's talk about what you're doing right now. We can start with gun control in the state of Delaware. We just talked about the national conversation. You put out a package of 5 gun control measures. Where does that stand right now, and how difficult has it been to get some of this stuff through?
First of all, it's really less about gun control and more about common sense proposals to reduce gun violence and keep weapons out of the wrong hands. So as you say, we introduced 5 proposals. One, a universal background check, got out of a House committee last week. We expect it'll be taken up in the full House tomorrow. Overwhelming public support, but that doesn't make it easy in the legislature. So we have continuing work to do to educate the legislature both on that bill and on the others as well.
You were just talking about, you phrased it as a disconnect between the public, voters, and people serving in the legislature who were voted into the legislature by this very same public. Is there any rational explanation for this disconnect?
And that's really looking nationally. I mean, if you look nationally, overwhelming public support for a number of these proposals, really common sense proposals, but so many folks in Washington just don't want to hear it. And we're hopeful that in Dover, Delaware, it'll be a different situation. But I think, let's face it, the other side, as soon as you talk about universal background checks, and as you said just a moment ago, boy, that doesn't sound so bad, making sure you're checking out before somebody gets a weapon. The other side immediately says you're infringing on our Second Amendment rights. That's not what this is about. There's nothing in any of our proposals that has anything to do with confiscation of weapons. We support the Second Amendment.
Do you think that we really are at the beginning of a longer-term change, though? Because when I look at how the NRA started to influence this issue in the 70s, it took years and decades for things to change. I mean, are we talking about a 20-year process here?
I think it's hard to know. I mean, I think as many of us thought after Sandy Hook, Connecticut, the moment was right to focus on some really common sense proposals. But as you just reported this morning, as Mike Allen just talked about, it's not clear that it's shaking out that way. So I think what we have to do is keep the focus on, keep the pressure on, and let people know this is just really common sense, and it's about keeping weapons out of the wrong hands.
Michael Steele down in Washington, are gun control advocates naive to think that anything big is going to get done? We were just talking around this table, if not after Newtown, when 20 children are slaughtered inside their own classroom, when for gun control advocates? A lot of people asking that now as the moment seems to be slipping away a little bit.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of pressure now that's going to reemerge to push to Mike Barnacle's point, which I thought was the most salient this morning, that this issue cannot get lost because Washington won't act. And to the governor, and it's good to see you, Governor, your neighbor to the south here. We share the Eastern Shore, although I think our blue crabs are a little bit better, but we can talk about that. How do you find your regional partners, the governors around you? Obviously, in Maryland, we are pushing through our legislature stronger gun controls that Martin O'Malley want. There's a great resistance and hesitancy with some of the legislators, even among Democrats. How are the regional partners responding to your efforts in Delaware and some of the leadership that you're showing there in this issue?
Well, as you said, Governor O'Malley has certainly been taking on this issue in a serious way, as as has some other states, but I think it gets to a broader and very important point. When you're talking generally about crime, the regional cooperation is incredibly important. So Governor O'Malley and I met about a year ago down in Salisbury, Maryland, to talk about what kind of interstate cooperation we can have across borders, focusing on going after the bad guys and figuring out how we can work together. And if you think about being on the I-95 corridor, it's just so easy to get from one city to the next, one state to the next.
Governor, I want to ask you, too, about what's in front of the Supreme Court this week and the question of gay marriage. You said yesterday that you expect at least to have some kind of a bill by the end of the year that could make Delaware the 10th state to legalize gay marriage. What are your hopes? What are your expectations for that?
My hope is that it passes. I mean, amazingly, just to show how quickly public opinion is shifting on this issue. 4 years ago in Delaware, it was legal to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. Think about that, 4 years ago. So first we changed that back in 2009. 2 years ago we passed civil unions, and I think there's a pretty good chance that same-sex marriage will pass in Delaware this year. I've never seen an issue that has moved so quickly, and I think in large part it's because of our kids. 2 years ago, when I signed the civil union legislation in Delaware, 600 people showed up. It was the most emotional bill signing. People said that they'd seen it in 40 years. And when I got home that night, I told my kids, they were both teenagers, I told them what had happened, and they said, "You've got to be kidding. You telling me that this is such a big deal in this age? This is, you know, they sort of think this is the way it is, the way it's always been, and the way it should be."
Happens all across the country. Every home across the country. Quickly, before we let you go, how quickly did the vice president come to getting thrown out last night yelling at
He was very well controlled. I have to say it was different. We were together, he and I were together 2 years ago in Texas when the University of Delaware football team was playing in a national championship. We were winning 19-0 midway through the third quarter. Ended up losing 20-19 to Eastern Washington. We talked to each other last night a minute to go. We said, this thing's not in the bag yet. And with 10 seconds ago, he turned to me and says, "Jack, this is not Fresno, Texas, where we lost a couple years ago."
Well, look at that. The Blue Hens into the Sweet 16. Joe Flacco, Ravens. This is a Delaware moment.
Absolutely.
For sure. Governor Markell, always good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Do we have a mower?
No.